Thank you, thank you. So glad to be here. Couldn't be here last month with being away on retreat, but so glad to be here tonight or this afternoon, wherever you are. And it's always just so lovely to come in to the sanctuary and to see all of these beautiful beings here. Just there's just this, I don't know the word, rich, deep kind of intimacy when we all gather together in a group like this, all with the same intention and all with the same supporting, loving energy of each other. And it never fails to kind of, it hits me energetically each time I start any session like this or any satsang, this kind of powerful wave of transformative love that we're giving each other, with maybe without even actually consciously realizing. And maybe for this time that we're together, this hour, we could focus on loving ourselves just as much as we would if somebody was to come on and ask a question, or they were struggling with some issue, going through a very dark time in their own awakening. Immediately we'd be moved, we'd feel compassion for that being, wouldn't we? But do we do that with ourselves when it's our own body and mind that is struggling? Do we do that with ourselves? And time again for me on my journey, the answer was no. I was super critical of myself, judgmental, and found myself saying things to myself that I wouldn't say to anybody else. So I just wanted to start with that because there's really no difference between you and anyone else here in this beautiful sanctuary. We're all at whatever stage we're at on our awakening. Some body minds might be just beginning that journey, some of allowing the light of the self to shine through. Some might be further along, allowing it more effortlessly. And it's totally okay. We are where we are. And it's a never-ending journey anyway. When this body-mind has finished and gone, there'll be another one. If you want to, there'll be another one and another one to continue to explore this unfolding in the manifestation that you are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we were talking today in the group, the group that we have, about what was the most challenging point in our awakening. And we were kind of sharing what people have found most difficult, and about the awakening itself. So, I mean, if you could take a moment just to think, if you had to name one thing that was the most difficult part of your awakening so far, what would that be? And how do you treat yourself again as we go through that most difficult thing? And, somebody asked me to share what mine was, and I ended up remembering this very, very challenging time in my awakening where I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. I didn't even know what awakening was. I'm laughing now, but I really wasn't then. And I felt embarrassed, ashamed to even want awakening, because I was looking at all these beautiful teachers that seemed to have their life in order, seemed to have this peace, this kind of light that was shining through them, this compassion, wisdom, this equanimity that never left them. And when I kind of looked at my own experience, it was very, very different to that. So I found this feeling of even wanting awakening to be painful to feel. And this desire for awakening was, it was just my own little secret. I didn't tell anyone else. I didn't know anyone else that was even wanting awakening at the time. I was just kind of stuck on my own, closed off to help and to greater insight, because I was in this very dark place where there's just this sense of, it has a happy ending, don't worry, this story. Hopelessness, despair, a sense that it was literally impossible for someone like me to reach awakening. And by someone like me, I meant back in those days, I was very angry with everything, myself, the world, and like a firework that's just been lit and about to explode. I was terrified of everything and everyone, most of all terrified of myself, I think, my mind and body, but also the self I was terrified of. Wanted awakening, but was terrified of it. So I got myself into this very dark hole from which I didn't know which way through. And I wanted to discuss this because it's come up a few times this week with various people, that we might tend to kind of hide away in those moments when we really could do with help, when we really could do with the community, the Sangha, the sanctuary of this safe, beautiful place. And if you look at your own journey, maybe in those times you've been tempted to, or maybe you're in one of those moments right now, where you just want to give up, you just want to kind of step back. And in those times, there is something that carries us through, something that won't let us give up. Even if we give up, we end up back on the path again somehow, usually despite our wish to stop. So I found myself in this position of not knowing how to continue, but also not knowing how to stop seeking. Also, too far gone down the pathway to go back to ordinary life as a separate being, having seen, at least intellectually, that wasn't what reality was, and that was even more painful perhaps than where I found myself in that moment. So it was a horrible place to be in my awakening, and I just really felt a call to talk about it today, about what helped, what pulled me out of that, what got me through, because it's come up several times, encountering people this week that have been in a pit of despair, and the tendency is in those moments to feel very alone, and to feel perhaps that you're the only person that is going through that at any particular time. And maybe as I thought that these beautiful beings that I was revering and wanting to be like, it never occurred to me that they might have gone through the same thing too. I was looking at them only after they'd come through this process, after they'd released their thoughts about things and they were feeling this peace. And because of that, I was putting them on this pedestal into a place where I couldn't reach, because there just seemed to be too big a gap between where I was experiencing my awakening, my life, or my lack of awakening, and what they seemed to be to me. So it helped me to come to finally understand that even these great beings had gone through this particular thing more than once and come out the other side, found a way through. What was that thing that pulled them out of the darkness and back into the light? What's that powerful thing? For me, I eventually stumbled upon this most important thing, where I began to have the energy to hope again, to really believe that I might actually be able to make it, to even feel relief at finding a way forward, because the absolute despair of hopelessness in those moments is the worst thing I think a human being can experience, especially when it comes to awakening, when a thing that we want so much, that maybe it's the only thing in our life that has any deep value for us and meaning now. And then when we feel we can't get to that, we might feel just totally cut off from everything else that used to matter to us, and now unable to move forward with this one thing into a resolution. So for me, the thing that I could rely upon was this desire for awakening, no matter how bad it got. And it got really bad, to the point where I wanted to leave this body. And if I couldn't find a way to move forward and get out of the pain I was feeling spiritually, emotionally, and physically sometimes, I just wanted to, I wanted out or through, because I just couldn't stay where I was another day, another minute. This absolute unrest within my being, within my soul. I could not continue. And in a moment of absolute despair, I remember praying. I have no idea to whom or what, and I was far too deep into non-duality at that point to realize that there wasn't anyone to pray to. So I felt really, really silly, just praying to essentially what was my own self. But I was out of options at that point. I was praying, begging, crying, just kind of shouting. I remember at some point, goodness knows what next door neighbors thought of me at that point, but just, get me out of here. I can't do this anymore, or help me somehow. I didn't even know what that help looked like. And I'm describing this because hopefully it might shatter some illusions that awakened beings haven't been through that you're doing something wrong if you're going through that, and if you're in that place. Hopefully it's shattering some illusions that nobody gets a free pass in that way. Everyone has been through that really, really dark night of the soul at some point and come out the other side at least once. So this deep, deep desire to wake up that just would not go away, even when I had no idea and didn't want it anymore. I was trying to get rid of it. If you ever tried to stop feeling a desire, it just doesn't work. It's actually desire in itself, isn't it? A desire to stop desiring. It just made the whole thing worse. So I'm praying, and I'm in my bedroom on my knees, and I had this moment where just nothing happened. And I remember sort of waiting for something to happen after I prayed, and nothing happened. I was sitting there crying, and I was just absolutely exhausted. No energy left to seek, no energy left to fight the seeking that was going on by itself somehow. And I just sat there and didn't know. It was actually the first time in my life, the first moment of peace I've ever felt, because at that point, I finally wasn't able to fight what is, or what was then. This total failure to awaken, total, spectacular failure to awaken by ego's methods, by my mind's methods. So I'm sitting there on the floor. I didn't know what to do. And then I had this picture of Sri Ramana Maharshi, and I'd had it for 15 years. I'd looked at it countless times and nothing had ever happened. But I found that I was just drawn to this picture and drawn to Ramana's eyes. And I just could not look away. Something started to happen, and it defied all logic. My mind was trying to rationalize, because there was this light shining out of his eyes, and it was just straight into my eyes. And I couldn't look away. There was just this physical thing holding my head in place. It seemed like, it felt like. And my brain's going at the same time, oh, it's the light shining in from the window. And I knew that wasn't true. It's the light coming from behind the picture. The curtains were on in the bedroom, so there was no light coming in at all. Nothing had changed. It was there was a light on in the room, but it wasn't sunlight. It hadn't moved. So I'm just sat there, and the only thing I could feel is relief, and relief that something was finally happening. And I remember this knowing at the time that it was the desire that survived all through the despair, the hopelessness, the lack of, the sense of failure, everything. This desire was still there, and in fact, even stronger through all of this to awaken to the truth. I'm saying that because desire really gets a bit of a bad rap, that it's something that we have to release and all of that. But desire for me was the one thing that I could hold on to. And of course, looking back, it was the self already wanting to wake up. But at the time, it felt like a little me trying to find its way home. So I'm transfixed to this photo for about 20 minutes. I don't know how long. It felt like 20 minutes. And something had changed inside. And I cannot, to this day, explain what happened in that moment still, except for using words like divine intervention or grace or something like that. And I went back and looked at that same picture every day, as you would for the next 3 weeks, and nothing happened. But it didn't matter, because something had changed inside. Something had shifted. I didn't have that hopelessness anymore. It was something had changed subtly. And I began to realize that the desire for awakening was the most important thing. So I began to read everything I could all over again, listen to everything I could about awakening to fuel this fire of this desire. I realized the stronger this desire got, the more power I had in my body and my mind to overcome these thoughts that I was a failure and things like that. Whatever pattern came up for me, insecurity, unworthiness, fear, all of that, stronger this desire was, that something was able to take that fear or that anger or that unworthiness and kind of turn it into something that I could use. And I became more and more determined. Every single time I suffered, there was this fire that was beginning to rage. I am never going to feel this way again. I'm going to use this, whatever this is that's happening in my life. And, life is happy to give us things to stoke that fire and turn it into some energy that I can, some greater desire. And when that desire got great enough, all encompassing, and it's not that I didn't want to participate in other things in life. It's not that I didn't have any other desires, because those were still there, of course. But this desire just became the strongest, that it eclipsed all the others for a short while. That if you ask me, I'd have an awakening or £1 million and the life of my dreams, it's a no-brainer. I want this one. I want awakening. So this desire, and I'm saying this because I want you to feel that you've got the tool that you need already if you're going through this dark place. And that this dark place is sloughing off everything else that's in the way. So it may seem justified to feel like a failure, to feel hopeless, all of that when you're in that position. And I totally get that. But what if those were the things that needed to fall away? Have you ever been so empty of energy, resources, spent completely from your seeking, that you just can't even want anymore? Awakening, something like that. And this desire for awakening, it's still here now. It's stronger than ever. Strangely, I thought it would go away upon a clearer seeing, but it's just like raging now. It's a raging inferno to keep seeing deeper and deeper. And it has this kind of heat, this kind of power to just burn anything that gets in its way. Any resistance, any unworthiness, any fear that comes up, anything at all. And I realized that the only reason it had taken that long is because I'd not known that I could stoke this fire on purpose. So That's what I'm inviting you to do if you're in that place right now or have been. Or usually we go through that several times. I went through that again, but it didn't last as long. I didn't go down as far. Each time it was quicker because I realized there was something really important happening in those moments. Why, after all these years of having this photograph, did something happen then? Because I was finally empty enough, at least, open enough in that second for something to break through my thought patterns and some light to come through from my real nature. And when I was looking at Ramana, just for that moment, I had let go of thoughts about my own failure enough, because I was revering Ramana, or it doesn't particularly matter which particular teacher we were with or looking at. It's just how open we are in that moment. And sometimes the only thing that brings us out of that egoic despair is love for the teacher that we're currently studying with, following, whatever, something that we're reading, something that somebody else says to us, whatever it is in that moment. It's an opening, and that's all we need. A split second, something begins to shift. And this is happening all the time, and perhaps we haven't noticed. So your desire right now is getting stronger, and you can add to it. You can put wood on this fire, the wood of every time you feel that you're going through this, or you're feeling some emotion that you'd rather not feel, you're having the same old crazy mind of all of this stuff going on, then can you use that? Can you use that as fuel? Can you make this fire hotter? Maybe that's its function, suffering. Maybe that is, if there is such a function of suffering, maybe that is it. Some ability developed within me, and it's within us all, or I should say it came to the forefront. It had always been there, but I didn't know it was there, to turn this into something useful. So every time I'm scared, can I be just a little bit more determined to go beyond all fear? I don't know how to do that, didn't know how to do that at the time, but just a little more determined. Every time I feel that sting of unworthiness, that I'm not good enough, that there's something shameful about me, can I use that to fuel my desire to feel that perfect love that is our real nature? On and on and on it went like this. So what are you currently going through? What was the last thing that came up for you that was really difficult to process, perhaps, or seemed too big when it first showed up? And can you see that something came through that more resolute, more determined, stronger somehow, more confident, more light of our real nature shining through our body and mind? What if that is kind of the process until this desire becomes so powerful that you just kind of get this distance from your mind, and it begins to, well, it stays where it is, you begin to kind of soar higher and higher above it, as if you're cruising above, like on an airplane, and down below there you can see the mind doing its thing, but it doesn't have this suction power to kind of drag you back down anymore. So what if you had everything you need right now already to find your way through any challenge at all? And this simplest of things that have been there for such a long time, in fact, all my life, desire for awakening. I didn't call it desire for awakening. I've called it many things. Desire to have enough money, to, at one point I wanted to be really famous. I was going to be a movie star. I was about 5 years old, just saying. Then I was going to be an astronaut. Then I was going to be, somebody who saved the world. And then I was going to be, and it went on and on and on. Eventually I realized that this was I want to be a good parent. I want to be, build my own business. Eventually it came down to this. I want to be free. I want to be so free that I can never be caught again. I don't want to experience it for just a moment. I want it all, and I want it now, and I want it permanently, and I want it effortlessly. And that desire gradually coalesced into, this is what I really, really want. So if you're feeling, a little embarrassed or a little like there's something wrong with you because all you want is awakening, then you really are in good company, because all of those other things come from that anyway. So maybe there's somebody that needed to hear this right now. Maybe I've managed to kind of maybe smash some illusions that we might have about some ideas that awakened beings somehow just magically burst through karma and live happily ever after. And it really is not like that. We all go through the same trials. We all go through the same challenges. We all go through moments where we just feel like giving up and do give up. But there is something within each one of us that will not stop. Why? Because it's already unfolding. The recognition of what you really are, infinite, formless, timeless, beyond all manifestation, yet inclusive of it. Never subject to birth, life, death, never actually suffering, although it picks up these thoughts as a human being, it seems to really suffer. This is already what you are. And the only thing that needs to happen is for that desire to become intense enough. How does it become intense enough? Well, for you to believe that it's possible for you, for anyone, for everyone. The very fact that you want to be free, to be awakened, to be enlightened, whatever that means for you, to realize your true nature, means that it's already in progress. And that's huge when you see it. It's already unfolding. The fact that you want it means it's happening. The fact that you want awakening means it's already happening. You don't have to make it happen. The desire in the mind and the body is the evidence of that unfolding already coming. It's the self calling itself back to its original pristine state of wholeness that it never left, except in thoughts, except in the mind. The mind is convinced that something happened to it. So that desire then becomes your most important tool and the best gift. And examining this idea that you can't or shouldn't, or whatever reason you feel it's not going to happen for you, this desire, as you examine those limiting ideas behind why you can't wake up and be free, then this desire just becomes exponentially powerful and has this aura, this energy, this life force of its own to burn through anything that needs burning through. And when that happens, you begin to recognize, to understand, this is already what I am. It's just unfolding. It's just shining ever brighter through this truth of my being, through these web of thoughts that have obscured it, that it's always been there. It just hasn't been clearly visible because it's been filtered and diminished through this thought constructed self that we have believed in for such a long time. When I began to realize that, I became quite excited, because there's no way to fail then at awakening. If the desire means it's already happening, which is contrary to what our mind says. Mind says, I want it and I've got to make it happen. But I never managed to find that separate being that had to make awakening happen. I only found, every time I looked, my infinite formless self. So because I want it, it's already happening. Just sitting with that with me here. Because you want to wake up, it's already occurring. Then there's no way to fail. There's no way to even screw it up. Best that we can manage to do as human beings is really kind of dig our heels in and make that unfolding really uncomfortable as we resist it with everything that we have. Of course, not consciously, but nonetheless, it's still happening. Cannot be stopped. It's happening on a microcosmic level in each body mind. It's happening on a global scale now too. It cannot be stopped. And that should give you a sense of excitement, a sense of hope. Maybe it makes you feel more empowered. That all we have to do is stop digging our heels in so hard and let life take us through the experiences that we need to have to fuel this desire. To see what we're believing and feeling in that experience and choose consciously to let it go. And the moment we do that, the experience changes, moves, and on we go. More empowered, more free, even stronger desire. So when I really understood this, and it took some looking at, and that's why I've said this before, I want to say it again. I really began to understand that desire has and always will be my best friend. Because it is a powerful energy that's giving birth to something. Already cannot be stopped. The very fact that you feel you want this means something is in the process of manifestation. Why do we not see it happening faster? Why do our body minds look different to those great beings like Ramana? Because we're still putting some thoughts in between this eternal infinite self and our body mind. There's a filter of thoughts. It's not going to happen for me. I don't deserve it. I'm not ready. It's not a good idea. Or whatever variation your own mind is putting on that. If it's what you already are, can it be a bad or dangerous thing? We're just looking in a mirror and seeing clearly what we actually are. No changeover taking place at all. Just a clear seeing, this is what I really am. So, if you're in that dark place right now, I hope this has given you some hope, some way forward, that you have the thing you need to climb out of that. The only thing you need is right there with you, right now, this powerful desire. And maybe if you go through some dark period, by dark I just mean very, very challenging and with maybe some heavy emotions. If you go through that in the future, maybe these words will give you solace then. Or maybe these words have given some perspective to why you've been through this in the past. And maybe somebody just needed to hear these words. And then you begin to realize these great beings, we don't really need to put them on such a high pedestal, maybe, because you're only seeing them coming through the other side of where you are right now. They've been where you are right now and found their way through it. Hopefully that gives courage and inspiration to deepen your journey, your desire. Okay, so spoke for a bit longer than I expected to there, but obviously something important was happening there. So if anybody would like to ask any question or share a challenge that they're having at the moment, feel free to either raise your hand or just speak up. I'd love to be here to support you if you are struggling right now, or if you're celebrating, if you're broken through something, or if you just have a question. Feel free to raise your hand.
Cherie has her hand up.
Oh, thanks. I didn't see that. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't find the raise my hand button, so I just raised my hand.
Thank you.
Hi, Helen. I have a couple of pressing questions that I'm just going to ask you really quick. The first one is, I don't even know how to put it into words, but usually when I'm meditating, but mostly more so when I'm laying down, like right before going to bed or like during my afternoon naps, I feel something very different. I start to get I can't put it into words. You know, the Turiya state that we talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that, but there is this deep void that I fall into. It starts out with as a sensation in the body, the spandana that we call in Sanskrit. There's this movement of the heart beat, and then it just becomes bigger and bigger, and something happens. So I've just been curious to understanding this. I can't put a name to it or explain myself better.
You're doing perfect. It's does it seem to come and stay for a while, and then at some point you just kind of come back to normal?
Yes.
Well, the usual consciousness, let's say.
Yes.
So
when my kids are screaming, I just I have
yes,
to leave.
that'll do it. Yeah, I've been there, done that. Yeah. So what we normally experience is our separate sense of self in the forefront, and maybe our essential real nature, Turiya state, as you called it, in the background of that. And when we are, I was going to say when we're meditating, but sometimes that's the last time we feel it. Sometimes when we're just kind of not trying hard at all. So when I'm about to fall asleep and don't really have any energy to kind of resist anymore, or when I'm watching a movie or something like that, where I'm not actually trying hard, then there's this kind of switch over where my real essential nature comes to the forefront, and or it's, you know, it seems to, and then the separate sense of self just seems to vanish, disappear. And sometimes I might just totally ignore my senses. Time has gone, duality's gone, change has gone, everything has gone just for that time. All sense of manifestation, I might just be completely not paying attention at all. That's just your essential nature being revealed, because what was obscuring it has temporarily gone. So you're in that kind of lazy place where you're about to fall asleep and you just can't hold that separate sense of self together and push against what is in that moment. So this kind of thing seems to open up that is very different to what we normally experience. And the reason it seems to go is because at some point, like you said, the kids are arguing or crying, and then there's a thought, oh, why is that happening? I want to stay, you know, so some mind activity starts back up again, and we seem to lose that then, don't we? But all that's happened is attention's gone back to this egoic sense of self, separate sense of self, and away from this essential nature. Still there, always there. It's just where our attention is in that moment.
Okay. But it's still not managed to hit the Turiya state where I'm aware of my dreams or my sleep. So that's still...
That will come later. At first, the waking state seems to disappear while you're noticing this. you can't experience it at first without losing awareness of a manifestation and time and all of that. As it keeps coming and you put your attention on it again and again, it keeps coming isn't the right word because it's always there, but then slowly but surely you can stay with that, even with your eyes open, and then even while your body's moving, and then even while you're driving, even while the kids are fighting eventually, and then even while the body's sleeping, even while the mind is dreaming at nighttime, even then. At first, it seems to eclipse everything else, but eventually you'll get used to it. Never gets any less spectacular, but you'll get used to noticing that it's still here. And the waking state, the normal everyday waking state, will just happen in front of it. Like right now, my body's speaking. We're having this conversation, and it's just happening in front of this that is. And then later, my body will be sleeping, and that's just happening in front of this that is.
Okay. Okay. And last question. I feel this, especially when I'm meditating. I don't know if it's the right platform to ask this question, but I have these involuntary movements that happen a lot. There's a lot of crying that is just beyond. I don't know why, but it doesn't. It's not because I'm sad, but I just feel better after I cry. But I just cry when I look at a flower, look at a leaf. I don't know. Somebody talks. I just start crying, and then I have these really rapid movements, especially when I'm sitting for meditation. I don't know if it's related to the Kundalini. I do a little bit of Kundalini yoga, especially when I have lower back pain. When it really hurts me, I do that. And Qigong really helps me. But just any insights on that would help. Thank you.
It's just where, the body's made of an energetic system, and it's where there's some resistance. So where there's a thought we're believing, that is a slower, lower frequency than this that is. So when this fast flowing energy that is our essential nature in the manifestation hits this pocket of resistance, it results in some movement. So the body's naturally drawn to move somehow, whether through involuntary movements or yoga or some form of energy work, or all of those. It might laugh, it might cry, it might yawn, all of those. Sometimes hiccups, everything, just a kind of movement to clear this energy. And the body's very good at doing that, but usually we go back to the same old thoughts again. So we're kind of putting that resistance back in. So it's good to work with the body, of course, if you feel that urge. But maybe also just to ask, what is this resistance about? What's this thought? I'd like to see what this is about.
Okay.
Crying sounds like the awakened state breaking through. If you're crying looking at leaves and looking at things like that, there's the deep recognition of the beauty and the essence of everything that begins to break through in these moments. Again, it's sporadic at first, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does that help you?
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
Thank
Nice
you.
to talk to you.
Same here.
Gabriel? Hi.
Hi, Helen. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Oh,
good. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good, good. I just wanted to share a little bit. Maybe it's going to sound a little bit similar to what has been said, but I wanted to share anyway. That sometimes, like, everything is seen, like emotions and thoughts and body and identification. Everything is clearly seen, and there is a joy in that. Even when there is like no good emotions, even like there is some struggling or something happened, even boredom sometimes is just like seen, and there is a joy in that scene, in that basically. And sometimes there is this kind of blindness where there is a certainty that anything can overcome or overlap the beingness. So that somehow it's obvious. But even though I know that, sometimes there is a feeling of experiencing some kind of blindness, or like, because sometimes even identification is seen. And sometimes it's like identification is there, but there is no room for the beingness. It's like the whole consciousness is there in that identification moment. And which I know it's not true, but it doesn't, that's not the experience when that happens, if that makes sense.
So sometimes you're able to just watch anything and everything that's happening. The body and mind are just, yeah. And then sometimes you seem to get completely overtaken by the illusion and can't even seem to recognize the consciousness behind it. Is that right? Yeah.
Exactly. And in those moments, it's not like a strong emotion or something, you know, something like big or something. It's just this feeling that there is no room left. It's all there. Even if it's not a very strong experience, it's like, okay.
Like I've lost that seeing, it's gone.
Yeah, or like the beingness is not enough here. I don't know, somehow. Yeah.
Let's check that out then. In those moments where there's just this thing going on and it's all you can see, and you might seem to have lost awareness of that seeing. So you feel like you're in it, maybe, rather than seeing it, watching it from a distance. Is that accurate? Yeah. So exactly. If you look at something in that moment is in it, something is totally caught up in thoughts, right? Or emotion, or whatever's going on in that moment. And still though, isn't there something, even in that moment, isn't there something that knows that?
Yes.
So in that moment, there is still, so I either know that I know, or I know that I'm thinking. So my knowingness, or my seeing, as you called it, will be seeing itself, or it'll be seeing thought activity, whatever experience is going on. Can it ever really be obscured then and gone? If it's the same seeing that's seeing this sense that I'm totally lost, I'm lost back in thoughts again, something is still there to see that and recognize that.
Exactly. And for me, it's very clear the presence, the sense of presence, just beingness, which cannot go anywhere. It's here now. But there is, I think, a thought there saying that the beingness is here, the presence is here, but it's not enough now in that moment. Yeah.
Is it that it's not enough, or is it that the feeling has changed? So if the presence is looking at itself, recognizing itself, the body and mind will feel peaceful, content, quiet, calm, energized, something like that. If the presence is looking through thoughts at an experience through the mind, then the body and mind will feel constricted, tight, fearful, whatever's going on in that particular moment, angry, that will be the experience of the body and mind. So the presence is the presence no matter what. What's changing is the way the body and mind feels. Whether there's any thoughts in the middle, the presence in the body, and then thoughts or not. So just clear presence looking through this. The body feels amazing, blissful, joyful, peaceful, more and more each day. If there's thoughts in the way, the presence may seem to be diminished, but it's not. It feels like it's diminished because the feelings that come with it have changed.
I was going to say, maybe that's the right word. It's not obscured. In my case, it's diminished. Yeah.
But what is it that's actually diminished? Can it be diminished, the presence itself? It's a really good question, isn't it, this? Because this is the pivotal thing. Even when my mind is doing its crazy thing and my attention's on that, is my real self diminished? Can I lose it? because what's actually happening in that moment is that because I'm looking through thoughts again, the state of the body and mind has dropped. And because of that, there's more attention going to what's happening in front of the presence than to the presence itself. Attention stopped looking here and it started looking more there. And we say it's diminished, the presence is diminished.
And usually in those moments, there is this thought of going back to that presence, which is completely not identified, or even perceiving identification, which is not happening on that moment. So maybe a comparison as well. Like,
what does going back mean for you, though?
Yeah, I think it's something very subtle. Like a moment ago, it was very clear that even a joyful state was being observed.
Yeah.
And now this state is kind of merging into the presence, or as you said, it feels like the presence is diminished. So maybe it's maybe a question could help in those moments. Like, can it really be diminished, for example?
Yeah.
Or something? Yeah.
And why should my experience, if I am the presence, why should my experience be different in that moment? Whatever the presence is looking at, whether it's looking at joy, fear, confusion, whatever's going on in front of it, why should my experience be different? So it's where we're subtly taking ourselves to be what's changing still, in that very subtle, but my experience could be the same peace and equanimity, no matter what the body's feeling, no matter what the mind's doing or not. Yes, the body might feel nicer if the mind is empty and free, but I don't need to be, I don't change in my experience, do I? Constantly the presence. So letting go of any sort of this going back, letting go of any idea of any process or something to get back. Just maybe going back then is a remembering. There's nothing happening to me here now. I'm still as I was, completely. Even though this identification thing's going on and it's really big.
Yeah. This is becoming more clear, because although the emotions are changing, like joyful, I was with a flu, as you know, like last week. So there was a lot of observation, like, okay, that's the state. My body is ill, but the beingness is exactly the same. And now I'm getting healthier. There is an observation, still the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a more of a remembering. I remain as I am always and cannot change. What I'm looking at is changing. But
Can
not
I say
me.
that it's an acceptance as well? Is it?
Yeah. And as you get more established like that, there's less preference for even joy and bliss and peace, because you're the same no matter what. And then ironically, you tend to feel more bliss and joy and peace, because you're not constantly trying to change what's happening to your body and mind.
Okay.
There's some resting in your essential nature, and just that resting reflects as peace anyway. So
just the joy to realize that I'm not changing.
Yeah.
I can feel it.
It's just the last little subtle place where we identify with the body and mind, isn't it, here?
Yeah.
The identification process itself.
Exactly.
We think that's happening to us.
Exactly. Because like there's like, even sometimes identification, as I said, can be seen. And sometimes it gets mixed and like, wow, then their mind probably starts comparing, like, okay, now you're caught.
Something happened. Yeah, something happened. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you.
Okay, we'll finish with Catalina. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Good.
My question is really simple one. And it's like, since I am practicing with you, I feel like really, really thirsty and tired. It has something to do with this, or I don't know. I'm just curious about that.
So thirsty and tired? Is it
Tired.
any particular time of day you're getting tired, or is it just any time?
Anytime, but yes, anytime. Suddenly, I just feel really tired.
So it can be one of two things. For me, I experienced tiredness a couple of ways. The first was as a resistance. I really, I sit down to meditate. I'm all ready to go. Or I'm sitting with my notebook and I'm about to do some contemplation, and then I'm just, like can't keep my eyes open. And it's like, this is really weird because 2 minutes ago I was fine. I'll go watch something on the telly and I'm fine, and then I go, hang on a minute, I go back to meditate and I'm falling asleep again. So that's not uncommon. It's an unconscious way of avoiding resisting practice. I don't think that's what's happening with you, and you probably get a sense, but I had to say it just in case. The second one is that we're beginning to experience in our body what it feels like to be free of thoughts. And the body has been, at first it's just a little bit at a time, the body's been so tight, so tense, so much at the effect of the fear of being a separate being, that we were born and then we're going to die, that we're separate to everything. This terrifying idea that there's all these other beings that I have no control over at all, that I can't be safe, that I'm going to cease to exist, has held the body in such tension. And when we start to actually get free of that bit by bit, the body just goes, oh, like finally. And for me, there was a period where I just slept a lot, and
actually that happened to me this weekend. It is like I usually sleep 8 hours the most, and suddenly I slept like 14 hours.
So just go with it if you can.
And I couldn't believe it. It was like, oh my God.
And it's just the body knows what it needs. And this is exactly the same with the water. There might be a desire for more water to literally flush the toxins that these emotions have left in the system, to flush them out. So, and of course, if you feel worried about it, get it checked out medically. But, that's absolutely okay too. Just, it's very normal because we've been like this and we haven't realized all of our life on like fight or flight mode, and suddenly that starts to go, and it's like, I feel very heavy suddenly. I'm very tired, and just sleep when you can. It will pass.
Okay.
The body relaxing. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Good to talk to you. Thanks. Okay. So I will hand it back to you, Sina. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful insight. Thank you.